Now, just real fast, we have the momentum having flipped on the S&P 500. It has not flipped bullish for the NASDAQ. So will the NASDAQ eventually join the S&P, or will the S&P momentum flip back to bearish? We'll be watching. And I told you I was looking for a bottom this week. I think that we have it from the Monday low. We went back. I talked about filling the gap, hitting the trend line on the weekly chart, and all the rest of it laid out just as I talked about. We have a bull flag now. Do we go up to the upper trend line and reach that near the 200 on the 60-minute chart towards resistance right here, and then start to turn down? Or do we start turning down immediately here around our 50-period moving average? I'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But again, going to be watching. Is there more work to be done? Do we come back and try to fill the gap here at the 58.43 area? I believe it's 58.43. Green bar on the awesome oscillator today still could end up getting confirmation of a higher low or a divergence if I'm wrong about this being a bottom. But I told you I was looking for a bottom this week, and we'll be watching. If we go higher to the trend line of resistance, short trading week next week, do we pull back after Inauguration Day, but then resume the advance? You're going to end up resuming the election rally. If we sell off tomorrow, if we sell off hard, then maybe do that at some point next week, start to resume the advance. If we go higher and then sell off again, maybe we come back and fill the gap, but then resume. Again, I'm looking for a wave one and wave two of these smaller subdivisions in the larger minor wave. I told you I thought this was wave four. I think the bottom is in. And again, I'm looking for a wave one and two to carve out here now at this time. This is the S&P daily chart. I'll be watching. We're above the 10 and the cloud is green. We'll be watching to see if the NASDAQ can flip everything back to bullish or not come Friday or on into week if it pulls back first. S&P broke the winning streak today, the 3-day winning streak, with our inflation rally. NASDAQ has not yet gotten a bullish reversal of conditions. Momentum is still bearish for NASDAQ. Now S&P momentum is bullish, and we got more bullish momentum today with the momentum line flipping to bullish. We still don't have that for the NASDAQ. We're coming up here to the 20 period and stalling. Again, you got the gap fill down here, so we'll be watching. You've got the if this low is taken out, you've got the presidential election gap higher just below that. But we are getting a green awesome oscillator. We'll be watching again eventually for the MACD to turn up and eventually confirm a lower high or a divergence if it can do that, if it can bottom surrounding this area or a little bit lower at the gap fill. Again, remember, topic tail in the monthly time frame, so it's possible NASDAQ has peaked. NASDAQ rally going on while the rest of the market was selling off. We got that bearish Harami pattern. We got the doji, the bearish Harami doji pattern, and that was confirmed with the Fed sell-off. So do remember, they could diverge from one another. Very possible we see NASDAQ try to make new highs. It's also forming a bull flag. NASDAQ daily chart here still bearish, reflecting momentum. We'll see if that changes, and we'll be watching the gap. Is there more work to be done down here? And again, do they diverge at a bottom? Does NASDAQ go lower and S&P gets a higher low? Could be. Taiwan Semiconductor earnings beat expectations today, but we saw an Apple sell-off of about 4% and an NVIDIA sell-off of about 2%. Concerns about Apple iPhone sales slowing in China now being reduced to number 3. The number 3 iPhone, the iPhone seller in China, sold off 4%. We'll be watching how all that unfolds. NASDAQ daily here. Flip the cloud again today. Could not do it. Could not do it. We're turning off the 20 period. That's a blue line you see right there. So again, we'll be watching. And if we do sell off, does NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another down at next low, which could happen if we try to go back and fill these gaps? We'll be watching. We've got the momentum on the NASDAQ, still bearish with our bearish reversal of conditions, and here still with momentum. We did get a little bullish signal here, but again, you got to flip the cloud here. You got to flip the ribbon, the background again, and you got to get momentum back into the positive region here if we're going to turn this around. We could still drop and try to fill the presidential election gap or hit our 100-period moving average. I think S&P likely bottom, but it still might form a bullish divergence. NASDAQ goes lower and reaches the 100 period. The S&P already has, so we'll be watching that. possible bull flags on both, but the momentum line's still bearish here. Momentum's still bearish for the NASDAQ. Bullish on the S&P. S&P getting more bullish signals today with the momentum line flipping back to bullish. We have, again, these little bullish signals right here. We're stalling at the cloud, though, both NASDAQ and S&P. So do we pull back or do we bust up and get a bullish signal on the cloud and then pull back towards the new green cloud that may form? But about the bullish divergences developing on indicators. We had it here with momentum, this triple bullish divergence. We had it on a lot of the indicators, 60-minute charts. We talked about that at great length of detail, and I told you that's why I was looking for a bottom this week. I thought we'd go down and fill the gap. We did do that on Monday, and then I told you we could try to bottom surrounding earnings and the CPI or the PPI and CPI inflation data. Fill the gap on Monday, and then we rallied with the inflation data, and we've created the CPI gap here. So do we come back and fill the gap or go up and hit the upper trend line or try to break through it and then come back? We'll be watching to see if there's more work to be done here. We've hit the 100 period. NASDAQ's just above it. Again, will they diverge down here? I think a good shot. You got a good shot. S&P is bottomed, as I said, with an ABC structure and now begun minor wave 5, and we're going to go to a new all-time high. I believe that's likely the case for the S&P, but sometimes they diverge, and maybe they diverge at this bottom. Does NASDAQ have a peak? Because we know that we got a topping tail in the monthly time frame, so we'll be watching that. But candlesticks are meaningless unless they get confirmation. I'll show you those weekly or monthly charts. Did I say weekly? Monthly topping tail on the NASDAQ. I'll show you that again over the weekend. So we have a bullish reversal of conditions, and we have the bullish momentum line here, and we're getting another bullish momentum signal here. The arrow, again, we'll be looking to see, do we try to fill the gap or go higher and try to fill it, or do we just continue the advance? We'll be watching closely, see if there's more work to be needed to be done. Remember, we're trying to bounce. Why did I tell you that we would likely bottom this week? Is because we're trying to bounce off that trend line from the 2023 low. That fills our gap from the presidential election. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really appreciate it. I don't have sponsors. I turn those offers down because I don't want to sell you stuff. So I just ask that you do what you can to help out. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. I thank you for your consideration for that. The VIX was predicting that we'd have a down day on the S&P today or on Friday. The VIX was correct. And again, it is very possible that we have bottomed. Again, the VIX peaked back over here. It did not move to a new high as the S&P moved to a new low. Oftentimes, the VIX will top before the S&P bottoms, as I've said. I think that's likely the case here as we're about to get the final fifth wave higher, and we've talked about that at great length of detail. S&P went lower. The VIX did not go higher. And again, VIX predicted today's sell-off. I think we're in a bottoming process. We'll see if we can break out of a bull flag or, again, pull back and fill today, the CPI gap now. We'll be watching that, but I think Monday's low put in a bottom for the S&P 500, and I think that we're going to rally towards the upper trend line, the rising wedge that I've been talking about in the upper channel in the weekly time frame. But the VIX predicting the rally. And with this week's rally, and this is why I told you I thought we had a bottom developing. With this rally that we've had now, the 50 periods now dropping back below the 200. So I think that buys us a little bit more time on the S&P 500 to get our final fifth wave higher to reach my objective target level in the weekly time frame that I've talked about so much. And over the last 11 weeks now, we have failed with the December and the November rallies. Rally that took us up to that December high on the December 6th failed to reach my target level, so I still think we're going to reach it. 50 now crossing the 200, suggesting again we might buy more time to complete the topping process, as I've said, reach my objective target levels. I thought we'd see a bottom this week. We talked about the December peaks, those 60-minute charts. Now those 60-minute charts are suggesting we have a bottom. I told you I thought it would happen this week. Divergences on the Dow and the Russell really gave us really good information to the December top and to the rally we have right now, possibly a bottom, which I think is likely. Now the VIX was predicting a down day for the S&P 500 today or tomorrow, and the VIX was correct again. There was an 85% chance of a down day today. The VIX, based on historical data of moves greater than 10%, was correct again. The VIX down more than 10% yesterday, predicting today's sell-off. It was correct. The Dow ended up down 68 points. Remember, the Dow is up 3% for the week, and again, the Dow that I told you with those bullish divergences on the Dow and the Russell, I covered it in great length and detail yesterday, and we covered it last week. Bullish divergences suggested we are going to bottom this week, and that's why I told you I thought we would bottom this week. I think that the bottom was likely Monday for the S&P 500. We'll see if that is the case for the NASDAQ. It still might diverge if the NASDAQ tries to fill the presidential election gap, which still might happen. The S&P 500 down 12.5 points, down 0.21%. NASDAQ down 0.89%. The Russell was up. An explosive rally higher over the last few days with the Russell. Again, the bullish divergences that I talked about last week and earlier this week are playing out. I told you I thought we would get a bottom because it tipped us off. The negative divergences back at the December highs tipped us off to the sell-off at the December highs. Again, NVIDIA down 2%, Apple down 4%. Again, concerns about iPhone sales in China. Taiwan Semiconductors, they beat expectations and they rallied, still saw the NASDAQ weighed down by NVIDIA and weighed down by Apple. These bullish divergences play out. We talked about this last week, and again, it's playing out. Still may be that NASDAQ comes back and fills a gap at 20,227, but these bullish divergences have given us this rally, and I think the S&P is probably bottom. We'll see if that's that case for the NASDAQ. But we have the gap here from the CPI rally, and then we have the gap down here at 20,227. We have the gaps up here we'll be watching. Remember, we got that topping tail in the monthly time frame, so we'll be watching to see if we stop making new highs on NASDAQ. But I'm looking for a bottom, and again, will this low hold on NASDAQ, or will it diverge with the S&P? I think S&P is likely bottomed with an ABC move. At the NASDAQ daily chart again, we have now drawn a channel here with this level, or possibly again a larger rising wedge if we go up to this trend line here. Should we be able to make new highs? You got the bull flag, a possible bull flag. If we go above the 20 period, again, could come down, fill the gap, and get a higher low here, or break this level and come down and try to fill the gap here, diverge with the S&P 500, fill the presidential election gap. Here's the presidential election rally off of our 50-period moving average. We have this rising wedge. Again, could be forming a larger rising wedge or evolving into a channel, as I've talked about. Again, and the question is now, will the NASDAQ go on and make new highs? Do we see something like what we had in January of 2022, where the S&P does, but the NASDAQ does not? And then we'll be watching, do they diverge here? Do they diverge in a top? We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But again, we're going to be watching to see if these lows hold. This was at our 100-period moving average. We don't have to fill this gap, but we still may. And if we do, we can hit the lower boundary here of a potential bull flag. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But again, we break the winning streak on the S&P. Rally here on NASDAQ has stalled at our 20-period moving average. Watch the trend line on the daily chart. Possible bull flag in play. And here's the bullish divergence as I talked about on the Dow. Bearish ones tipped us off to the sell-off. The bullish ones caused me to believe that we're bottoming out. I think the S&P is going to go make new highs, and it's bottom completing the wave 4, now starting the wave 5. Pullback would likely be a little 1 or 2 on the S&P 500 if it in fact has bottomed, which I believe it has. And I told you the Russell would likely hit that 200 period in the trend line. It gapped down on Monday, hit that trend line, and hit the 200 period, and we've rebounded back up. And again, the bullish diversions tipped us off to believing we were likely going to bottom here. So I think you've got, in all likelihood, a bottom developing here on the Russell. But I do believe it's topped already, and it will end up diverging with the S&P 500, as I've said. But I think the S&P is going to go make new highs. We are seeing the 10-year yield drop, and again, the inflation data, the expectations of inflation have caused us to go much higher. If we are now starting wave 5 for the S&P 500 and the negative correlation continues, this can go lower. S&P goes higher till the next round of inflation reports on February 12th with the CPI. Possible we're topping here, but it's also possible you get a major double top over here if we pull back and then get one more surge to this level. I don't think we go much more above that here on TLT, the 10-year yield. Again, has a negative correlation for the market turning off of our trend line here. Again, I told you last week, over the weekend there, I thought a bottom would develop this week because of these bullish divergences. And again, but I told you I thought we'd come back and fill the gap. And if we did, we would hit that trend line in the weekly time frame. It played out exactly that way. And it formed a little divergence here in the most recent price action on the 60-minute chart. I think this low is likely going to hold at our trend line of support on the weekly chart. And again, filling our gap here. So if we do pull back or go a little bit higher and hit the trend line and 200 period and then pull back, and if we change it ever so slightly and include this shadow or this peak right here, this overthrow, then you move just above that 200. Here it's just under it. But if we go higher, again, got a possible little 5-leg push higher here. Maybe that's done over here, possibly. But again, this could give us a wave 2, fill the gap, and then go on and break out of the bull flag, and that would give us a wave 3. But the gap fills at 58.43. We talked about the bullish divergences over here and on the 15-minute chart and on the 5-minute chart. All of that, we talked about that, and I told you that's why I thought we would end up going down and filling the gap, getting the diversions completing on the 15-minute chart and here on the 60-minute chart in this most recent price action. We talked about that over the weekend. Played out beautifully, and I told you the trend line is right there on that daily chart and weekly chart, and we're forming a bull flag. If I zoom out, we can see it. These divergences played out beautifully and tipped us off to what I think is probably the bottom here. So again, I remain bullish in that I believe we're going to go to a new all-time high and exceed our December high here. We came down and we moved slightly below the 2023 trend line right here. This red trend line right here moves slightly below it on the daily chart here. And again, I think we're going to carve out a bottom in all likelihood at that level and eventually move back up to this red trend line here and the black upper boundary of the channel. This is a daily chart, likely form another divergence reference point or a brand new one here in the daily time frame. So again, this level, I told you to be watching this trend line beginning of the week and last week. We've talked about the trend line in the weekly time frame and here in the daily time frame. Here it is up close and by itself here, again, from the 2023 low. And again, just slightly violating that. I told you I thought the July peak would hold, and we fill that gap, and this trend line would likely give us a bounce. And so far, it is playing out that way. I think we're eventually moving up to this upper boundary right here, and then I think the S&P will top. I think that will be the final fifth wave, as I talked about. Here it is in the weekly time frame. Again, we talked about this trend line just below our 20-week moving average. We've slightly violated it, and then we've rebounded back up. And again, I think we're headed up into this trend line and this upper boundary of the channel where they intersect, or very, maybe it just slightly overthrows it, depending on when we come into contact with it. But I think that that is where we're headed. And again, that could be over the next few weeks here. Could be something like this first wave right here, where we had this first wave higher that lasted a few weeks, or this can go on several weeks if we take our time reaching it. But like I said, I think that you got a good shot reaching this trend line and forming a top. We've had 11 weeks now where, again, since the November rally where we failed to reach it. The trend line is my target, and I think we will still reach that and get our final fifth wave here. Again, I think we have the 5 minor waves right here, and this will complete the larger intermediate 5-leg push higher from the 2022 low, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now 5 here. And I think we're in the fifth of the fifth here, and I think that will complete the primary wave 5, which again 3, 4, and 5 over here with the circles. That's why I think we're going to new highs. MACD is still bearish and with the divergence, but the RSI has not dropped below 50 yet. I think it will turn back up and get another reference point of a divergence to complete the blow off top. So again, the trend line of the rising wedge and the upper channel here in the weekly time frame, very important stuff in my mind. Why I still remain bullish in the weekly time frame, because I don't think the divergence is done yet, and I think we're going to bounce here off the trend line in the 20-week moving average. Again, we could either pull back on Friday, get a big sell-off on Friday, or going into the inauguration next week with the short trading week, I think the S&P is likely bottomed. I think it will likely set up a higher low. When it does, we'll be watching. Again, you've got a bull flag going on here now. And again, I talked about either a channel expanding or, like I said, that rising wedge, which is this red trend line right here, coming into play. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that that is where we're likely headed. But I want to keep this other potential channel should my low hold here with our gap fill. And I talked about this over the weekend and told you we could come back here, fill this gap, which we did, and then resume the advance, our final fifth wave, our minor wave 5. These are the minor waves close up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then now I think we're just starting wave 5, minor wave 5, and it could be something that looks like this. And maybe we fill the gap later, maybe we go higher, and then you just get a mild pullback and go higher, but I think you're going to get a 5-leg push higher in this fifth wave. And we'll see, do we try to fill that gap immediately or not? I want to watch a gap. Is it a gap and go, a gap and fill, or a gap and trap? If it's a gap and fill, we go back and fill it. If it's a gap and go, we don't. And if it's a gap and trap, then we start moving in the other direction and taking out that low. We'll be watching. But again, I think the presidential election rally could continue that we had over here now that we filled the gap and give us our final fifth wave. The bullish divergence down here on the histogram, but the MACD has not yet gotten a bullish cross. If we sell off, it may get confirmation of a higher low if our low can hold from Monday, or we may just bust on up to the upper boundary and then sell off, or try to bust through it and get a more mild sell off if that is the case. We'll be watching. And the election rally continue with the gap fill of the election rally at 57.83. I think you got a good shot of that, but we still might pull back either tomorrow or right after the inauguration day. Looking for a wave 1 and 2 to set up here if we bottomed out on Monday.